optimizing data center deployment with the global capabilities and the programmatic approach. So my name is Grace Lee from Converging Technologies, and I'll be your moderator for today's session. Convergint and Anixter, two leading global service providers, partner to solve some of the most difficult challenges in the data center deployment, supporting our global cloud, co-locations, and enterprise customers to scale faster. During the session, the panel will share technology trends, solutions, and the service in the data center deployment, as well as some best practice for the data center optimization. So thank you everyone for joining us today. A big welcome to our panel, our subject matter expert who will be providing insight to this subject and also available to answer your questions. So during the session, you're welcome to post your questions or comments at any time. We'll collect those questions and then respond to them during or after the session. So if we could not get on some of the questions today, we'll make sure we do the follow-up with you afterward. Before we dive into details, I'd like to turn this to our panel for a brief introduction. So first, let's welcome Mr. Andy Jimenez, the VP of Technology Solutions from Wesco and the Anixter team.
Thanks, Grace, for the introduction there. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm not sure where everybody's at today, but glad to be part of the panel. As Grace said, my name is Andy Jimenez. I'm part of our global technology strategy team with Wesco Anixter. I'm based just outside of Chicago. I've been with the legacy Anixter organization for 22 years, and I've been in the ICT industry for 30 plus years, largely in a technical role, working with the various industry committees, delivering new solutions and technologies to the market. Two committees in particular, the Telecommunications Industry Association, the TIA, and the IEEE, the Institute of Electrical Electronics Engineers. And we'll cover some of the technical work that the organizations have been doing over the last several years to improve data center performance. But I'm looking forward to participating in the panel today. I'll throw it over to Randy.
Good morning. Thank you, Andy. Randy Henson. I've been with Anixter Wesco for 29 years, starting basically in the networking division. I've spent an enormous amount of time in the data center market, working with companies to develop both their enterprise data centers and in the multi-tenant data center space. I focused a lot on storage networking and historically worked very closely with data monitoring and management and power solutions. Based on that, I've also got a networking background. So most of my roles with Anixter have been in either sales or technical sales roles. That really covers it for me. Brett?
Thanks, Randy. Hi, everybody. My name is Brett Allen, and I've been with Anixter, Legacy Anixter for going on 19 years now, in a variety of roles. But currently, I'm in our supply chain solutions group, which means that I focus on our large, complex project deployments, whether that's for data centers or any other type of project, to simplify the material management, the product delivery, and really coordinate to make sure that a deployment can go as quickly and flawlessly as possible. Steve?
Hi, good day, everybody. Steve Jones, 20 years experience in the network infrastructure background for me. The last 5 years focused in the global hyperscale account space, working with the large global hyperscale accounts to deploy their data center projects worldwide, and working with our partners like Convergint to make sure that those deployments go seamlessly and as smoothly as possible, based out here in the Pacific Northwest of the United States. So looking forward to the discussion today.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. As data center are the primary target for the data breach and the insider threat, in order to keep our data center safe and your brand's reputation intact, it's essential to implement a comprehensive security solution that will deter intrusion, mitigate the risk, and enables faster response in the case of an incident. Converging Technologies is a global service-based service provider integrators with the significant expertise integrating industry-leading security solutions for data centers. So Convergent's layered approach to securing global data centers, enable the maximum performance and uptime, while ensuring regulatory compliance and the highest standard of security are met. Just over a year ago, Converging has made a significant investment to establish a vertical focused effort with a dedicated team in place. We are focused on the further developing our strategy, our program, and the expertise with the mission to become the industry leader and also serve our global data center customers better. So as one of the strategic partners, Wesco Anixter has a long history of developing, innovating, and supporting many global customers from data center resiliency and the supply chain strategy perspective. I'd like to ask Andy to share a high-level overview about the Wesco Anixter approach in the data center market. Andy, please lead the way.
Thanks, Grace. And again, really appreciate the partnership with Convergent. It's a long-standing relationship with Convergent. We've been working for the better part of 2 decades on delivering product solutions into the market. And a year ago at this time, Wesco and Anixter were actually 2 different companies. Wesco completed the acquisition of Anixter back in July of 2020. And the combined company now is approximately an $18 billion entity now in terms of revenue. Our core expertise is B2B distribution and supply chain solutions. So that's really the core of what we are, is distribution. And we're really aligned across 3 specific business units. We have electrical and electronic solutions, really targeted towards more heavy industrial and factory floor types of customers and environments. The center business unit is communications and security solutions, which is more for commercial office spaces and data centers. And then the third business unit is utility and broadband solutions, covering our service provider and utility customers. But really what makes us different are all those things on that second layer there. Aside from distribution, we have a very large technical organization. We have our technology services and support team that can provide insight and technical support to our customers. We have 18,000 salespeople scattered around the world that can provide technical assistance and specialization across lots of different technologies. So data centers, wireless solutions, structured cabling solutions, security solutions, whatever the physical infrastructure needs are, we have the expertise behind it. And the other thing too that makes us different is the global reach. So we've got a presence in 52 countries around the world and 300 cities. And really, we're really well aligned with Convergent in terms of our footprint, our global footprint, and the ability for us to take projects and service them globally, I think is unique in our relationship with Convergent. And as we'll cover later on, we have a comprehensive set of value-added services where we can do deployments around the world, sourcing products and making sure they get on site and under budget. And we're also looking to make a ton of investments over the next few years around our digital transformation. So how can we create new efficiencies in the way we do business? So there's a lot of new technologies that we're consistently vetting for our internal use, and that's really a part of the initiatives that we've kind of undertaken as a company to make sure that we can provide absolutely the best service to our customers around the world.
Yeah, Andy, as we all know, the Intel world has been going through a global pandemic for over a year. So there has been a great deal of media with the recent events. That has put a lot of attention and a focus on the robustness of the internet, with a huge spike caused by at-home activity. So what is your take on that?
Yeah, no, the pandemic really presented some challenges, I think, on the outset. Obviously, there was a capacity constraint that we had on many of the networks that we saw around the world. So this really taxed the ability of the data centers to deliver services to the users. Because with this kind of new digital environment that we've been operating in, where we're doing everything over the internet, whether that's shopping, going to school, doing work, entertaining ourselves with Netflix and such, it's really placed a lot of demands on the networks to deliver those services in a seamless fashion. In some instances, there's a highlight there. Netflix actually had to reduce the video quality in their Canadian operations to lower the bandwidth use because of the tax that was placed on the network. So by reducing the video resolution, they were able to reduce the bandwidth requirements needed across the network. But these are some of the things that happen. Luckily, what we saw is an adaptation by the data center industry, kind of a bend but don't break attitude. So the systems were definitely stressed, but I don't think at any point there was severe outages. So it's a credit really to the data center operators for really stepping up and really coming to the table with new solutions and new ways to improve performance. But really, the data centers are critically important, as this quote shows. We rely on broadband services, data services to operate our businesses, and it's critically important that we have a resilient data center, not just from an operational and performance perspective, but also from a supply chain point of view. Obviously, there's a lot of products that are involved in the operation and delivery of data centers to the market. So we want to make sure that at least from a supply chain and logistics perspective, that we're sourcing the products in an efficient manner as we deliver data centers and support our data center customers throughout the world.
Yeah, Andy, from your perspective, how has the last year been impacted by the global pandemic, and how the applications are delivered to the users, and how the data center are structured, right? So with all the change.
Right. Yeah, I think we really see a couple applications really driving data center design today. There's IoT. So there's statistics out there that there'll be 75 billion connected devices over the next 5 years, whether that's in a connected home, a smart building, industrial IoT, or smart city IoT environment. We know that the device growth will be there. So that presents some challenges in terms of connectivity and service to those devices and those environments. I already mentioned content delivery. There's been strains on the network in terms of delivering video services, social media applications with video, cloud applications and gaming applications. These have all, again, taxed the network to some degree. So really what we've had to do is really re-architect and rethink about how we process the information across the network because of these applications. There's some other applications like Bitcoin and blockchain and some of the self-autonomous vehicles that are coming out there. But I think from a processing point of view, what we're seeing across the industry is the need to support what we call a low latency infrastructure, which means that the ability for the data centers and the core of the network to process information, that time for us to process the information from the core all the way out to the device is very low. So from a low latency point of view, that's really the main thing that has to happen. And the way the industry is adapting to that is we're delivering more what we call distributed computing through the use of edge data centers. So rather having all of your computing resources consolidated at the core of the network in the cloud, now what you can do is use more of a distributed architecture to basically distribute those resources closer to the devices and users that need them. So really adopting kind of this edge based computing model. And I think this is really where I think, in my opinion, the bulk of the build out will happen over the next several years is the investment in edge infrastructure to support low latency and even high bandwidth applications. Because again, the application requirements are kind of dictating that we need to do this.
Yeah, Andy, thanks a lot for the insight. Randy and Steve, I know you work with multi-tenant data center and also the hyperscale customers very closely. What is your take on how the data center industry is responding to the situation that the COVID-19 has put all of us in today?
Thanks, Grace. That's a good question. What we've really been seeing, the increased traffic loads that resulted from the COVID-19 really changed, it had a major impact on the multi-tenant data center and edge data center market as a whole. So we kind of saw it in two different phases. The first half of 2020, a lot of the capital spending just stopped. It froze up while people tried to anticipate, but for almost all of the enterprise data center that were going into multi-tenant data center spaces, it just kind of dried up. But then the crush of new activity that came from everybody being home drove the hyperscale guys, and the hyperscale guys started releasing money very, very quickly, and their traffic loads just shot through the roof. As a result, it was kind of the tale of 2 years. The first half of the year was a little bit slow from a multi-tenant data center side. The second half of the year, the infrastructure spending jumped up dramatically and has continued through the beginning of 2021. And we don't see it slowing down because the hyperscales, which are driving a lot of that spend, have not slowed down either. Enterprises are starting to come back on board, and we're starting to see more there. But if you look at the projected market growth for cloud overall, it's absolutely enormous all the way through as far as the eye can see. So from that perspective, you're going to see a continued boom in the multi-tenant data center space. The second thing that we've really seen was a bigger push to upgrade the network infrastructure. A lot of these guys were on a multi-year kind of a slow roll to upgrade their network infrastructure. Even, all of these guys use single mode fiber, so that part of it was already in place, but their electronics were really still predominantly on 10 gig. Now we're starting to see a big upsurge in a migration from 10 to 40 to 100 gig, and of course on the server market from 10 to 25 gig as well. So what we're seeing is a compressed timeline there. They're really being they're really being pushed to catch up a little bit from that first part of the year, and it's not going to slow down. So if you look at what really was stressed, a lot of the data centers had enough infrastructure in place, but where the access and where the content was being generated and being driven from moved farther and farther to the edge of the network. So as we all were at home and downloading videos and doing our work, and you see all this network, this slide kind of shows it all. This one really just talks about voice traffic, but the video traffic was absolutely exploding in ways that aren't even reflected on this slide. So the question is really going to become, is that a permanent situation, or as we return to the office space, how much of this is going to shift back? It's probably going to be a blend, because a lot of companies may not, they look at it and they may change how they were conducting their business.
Yeah, Randy, I would just add on to that. We saw exactly what you described, which was the large hyperscalers really refocusing their efforts into the lease and multi-tenant data center environment to rapidly expand in country and expand their capability and capacity into these countries, driven by content demand and also country regulatory compliance for how they handle personal data as well. So a big focus into that space as they could quickly ramp up capabilities there.
Yeah, thanks, Steve and Randy. With all the increased traffic, I know Andy, you are represent Anixter on ICT community, right? So what can you tell us about the latest technologies and the standards that are promising a greater, throughput and the bandwidth going forward?
Yeah, it's an increasing challenge, obviously, and the standards committees. I mean, the good news is that as an industry, from the ICT perspective, we've been developing new technologies over the course of the last several years. So we've got new solutions around 400 gigabit Ethernet. This is an example here. This is from the IEEE. This is the 802.3 CM. This was published, I think, about 2 years ago. But this is really the multi-mode fiber option for 400 gig. Randy had mentioned that single mode is probably the most commonly used optical fiber in most data centers. And the reason for that is really you've got the physical reach that can go really long distances, kilometers in distance, and also support a very high data rate. But there are instances, especially within the core of the data center, where a multi-mode option is needed. Multi-mode has a lot of advantages from single mode, namely in a reduced cost because the optics are typically an order of magnitude less. But also multi-mode fiber uses what they call parallel optics. So using multiple strands of fiber, either in a 12 fiber or 8 fiber or even a 16 fiber configuration to deliver all of the services from one transceiver to the other. So with a high-speed link, especially with 400 gigabit per second, what you have the ability to do with the parallel infrastructure is do individual breakouts. So you have some additional flexibility with a multi-mode infrastructure in that you could take a 400 gig circuit and break it out into individual 100 gig circuits within your data center. So this gives you an added degree of flexibility in terms of the operations. But really from a capacity perspective, we're trending higher and higher as we've discussed. So 400 gigabit per second has been available. The IEEE standard now has a new study group that is looking at beyond 400 gigabit Ethernet. So we're looking at new data rates upwards of 800 gigabit per second and even upwards of 1 to 1.2 terabit per second data rates. So these new technologies at the core of the data center networks should have the proper capacity. We've done a lot of analysis on the capacity, and I think these new data rates that will be available over the next 2 to 3 years should be able to keep up with the bandwidth demands of the network. So really what it comes down to then is, how do you architect and now design your networks? Because I think from a capacity point of view, we should be covered.
Yeah, thank you, Andy. Randy, just want to circle back a little bit on the multi-tenant data center side, right? So as the user and application demands continue to increase, how the data center facility adapting to this kind of a needs to accommodate a higher bandwidth and a lower latency network structures. What is your take on that?
Well, we're starting to see a couple of different trends in the facilities within the data center community, particularly in the multi-tenant data center space. One is the compressed timeline to upgrade their network infrastructure. The huge traffic loads have really changed what their network backbones look like, and they're having to move from 10 gig, 40 gig to 100 gig and 400 gig in a much faster timeline than they had in the past. So they're investing heavily. You're starting to see a real spend on what looked like was going to be a multi-year rollout into upgrading their network to a much shorter compressed timeline. The second factor, obviously the latency issue, is it is really changed away a lot. Well, let me rephrase that. Digital transformation has changed where data is created, where it's going to be analyzed and processed, and then where it's ultimately going to be consumed and used. So Internet of Things, as Andy had mentioned earlier, has created this new wave of data from machine to machine traffic. Most of that data is actually being generated at the edge of the network, and it's going to be processed and filtered at the edge of the network. Well, most of our multi-tenant data center mega facilities, so to speak, are really built out in tier 1 markets. They're not really built into tier 2 markets. So they're not really great in addressing the latency requirement of these type of applications. So what we're starting to see with the data center operators is a 2-tiered strategy. They're going to have centralized data centers that handle one type of traffic, and they're going to move more and more low latency requirement traffic to the edge of the data center. So that will address how quickly the response times are for the type of traffic that needs that. Those are two of the biggest issues. So what we're really seeing is an investment in upgrading their core networks, and then 2, an investment in expanding their footprint to get closer to the original point of where this data is all being generated. So you're seeing more and more movement towards the edge, and then more and more investment in upping the pipes back to the centralized data center, and then more and more processing power at the edge to filter out data that doesn't need to move upstream.
Yeah, Randy, thank you. That makes a lot of sense here. Brad, I suppose this is what is driving the innovation and the demands to come up with the labor saving options there and the specific solutions for the pandemic times, right? So can you please share with some example with us?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, like Randy was mentioning, the data centers are looking to upgrade and speed up their upgrading of their networks to the 10, 40, 100 gig, et cetera. And so in doing that with that speed, the time to market has become even more critical than it always has been in the data center world. So what we're looking at is, as Anixter and as a distributor, is what can we do to help speed that process along and help those data centers come up more quickly when it comes to the material management and deployment piece of it. So looking at that, our thinking is, what can we do on our side to help and allow the technicians, the Convergent people that are actually in the data center doing the work, help them spend their time on the highly technical procedures and processes that they're trained to do, and we can help out on the front end. So you see some examples here, one of which is just, or really a couple in the same category, on moving material while it's on the job site. So you see the cable tray cart and the secure cage delivery options there. So what those are, just briefly, is the cable tray cart, as people may know, a stick of cable tray is typically 10 feet long. So when it arrives on a job site, you need 2 people to move it around, 1 on each end. Whereas if we can deploy all of the tray in a cart like that, you now only need 1 person to move it around on site, so that second person can be doing other technical tasks that they're trained for. And secondly, it's a safety issue too, right? So you don't have to worry about lifting and twisting injuries as much because you're just pushing a cart around. Same thing with the cage, right? It's a secure, lockable cage. So if you've got high value equipment in there, switch gear, expensive cameras, what have you, keep it more protected, on wheels, so it's easy to move around a job site. Where you can get into some big labor and time savings are things like pre-configured cabinets. So we can build the cabinet within our facility and load it with all the passive equipment and even active gear if that's required as well, and package it up appropriately and deliver it to the job site. So then when it's received, instead of the technician receiving a bunch of boxes and having to break down pallets and then start building a cabinet there, the technician can just bolt the cabinet to the floor, do the terminations, turn it on, and you're good to go. And so it just, we're allowing the technicians to do their technical work. I mean, Convergent, integrate, anybody on that team has spent a lot of time, a lot of years training, getting educated on how to do this. That's what they want to be doing, not breaking down boxes and moving pallets and recycling waste and things like that. The other InstaReel is just a deployable reel that does not require jack stands. So again, you can use fewer people to do that installation. The pre-terminated fiber, what we do a lot is pre-label that for the customer. Again, if you've got a highly trained Convergent tech on site, is using a label maker really the best use of their time? Are they really enjoying that? Is there something more valuable they can be doing? So that's kind of the thinking behind it. And all of this to get, with the ultimate goal of getting that deployment completed as quickly as possible. The multi-tenant data centers and their hyperscale customers want to be turned up as quickly as they can. So we work in conjunction with partners like Convergent to help them make that happen.
Yeah, thank you very much, Brad. That's a lot of good information there. We certainly appreciate this kind of partnership and help us go faster. You mentioned several times about the speed, right? I want to get this back to Randy. It has been said the slow is the new done in a data center environment. So in order to maintain uptime, what is your opinion about who in the data center space has the obligation to make sure things don't slow down?
That's a great question, Grace. I will tell you that in a word, everyone is responsible for helping to make sure you have a complete strategy to keep your data center running as close to 100% uptime as possible. The reality of it is all of the stakeholders that are going to be participating in the data center have a role to play in uptime. It doesn't matter if you're the network team, the operations team, the the facilities operators, server team, anybody that within that community has a role, because any outages of any of those subsystems can create an impact on uptime as a whole. Now, as measured by just the facilities piece and what we traditionally think of what is measured by the uptime organization, it's a little bit different animal, but take it beyond that. It's the entire ecosystem of people that are going to be engaged in the data center. So not just somebody like one of the multi-tenant data center operators, but the contractors and the integrators that are going to be working in that space are just as important. And that's why you see a lot of these people really going through a vetting process to make sure who's going to be on site and what they're looking at and what they're allowed and not allowed to do within the data center space. That's why partners that have a long history of working in mission critical facilities like Convergint are very important to the overall strategy of uptime for a data center operator. From Anixter's perspective, one other big issue that has become more and more critical over the last year in particular has been the supply chain piece of this. A lot of these products take an enormous amount of time to schedule and deliver, particularly in the gray space. And those delays in supply chain are real money costs that can impact the profitability of these facilities enormously. So I would say that between the contractors, the integrators, the traditional multi-tenant data center operators themselves, and then their supply chain, you have to have all of those components working together in the ecosystem to make sure that the uptime is really secure.
Yeah, thank you very much, Randy, for that. This is very clearly is a shared responsibility for the increasing productivity here in the data center operation, right? So Brad, what role does the supply chain play in the improving resiliency here? What can you share with us some input here?
Did the mute. So yeah, thanks, Grace. So along those lines, what's so critical with supply chain, and Randy touched on it, is managing all of these different parts and pieces from different manufacturers, different sites, different deliveries, and making it all go nice and smoothly. And the way to do that is to really have, and I know it's an overused phrase, but have really strong communication between all the partners that are on a given project, right? And so that can include everyone, including the end user, the multi-tenant data center themselves, the general contractor, the electrical contractor, the security integrator, datacom, et cetera, and not to take away from the mechanical contractors and plumbing and everybody else that's involved in putting these buildings together, and coordinating all this stuff, and making sure that as products are being sourced, that you have alternatives. It's maybe not as critical to have one specific manufacturer all the time. Have a backup, because we're seeing it now with shortages in steel, shortages in computer chips, in copper, et cetera. Having various options to choose from makes a lot of sense sometimes. Again, with managing that material prior to delivery, having it in different locations to avert the risk of any sort of disaster, weather, transportation issues, and that. And certainly, as we touched on in my previous slide there, kind of what can you do to that product beforehand, before it gets to the job site, to simplify the installation. And again, no one's an island in this process, right? We're all interconnected, in terms of making this project done. A vendor, a manufacturer needs integrators, needs distribution, in the same way that distribution needs integrators and end users and everyone else. We can't do it all by just reading minds. We have to have those regular cadence calls and conversations that when you do, like we said, Convergent and Anixter have been working together for 20 years, and we've kind of gotten into a rhythm of doing those sorts of things. And it really makes such a difference in getting that supply chain as clear and simple and smooth as it can be for any given deployment.
Yes, Brad, you brought up a very great point, a very good point there. We certainly is a critical for all the equal partner working together. We certainly value and appreciate the strategic partnership with our partners, and also the proactive approach there, right? So, Steve, I know you have been managing a large cloud and data center customers at a global scale for a number of years. How important are the traditional drivers like cost, time to the market, and the customization to enable the resiliency? And are you feeling the increased pressure to complete the project more quickly?
Yeah, great question, Grace. And I think as you've seen from both Randy and Brett's points on their slides, there is a tremendous amount of pressure to deliver these projects in a quicker time frame, and not just a single project. Most of these customers are deploying multiple projects across the globe. So as you can see, really the construction timelines have essentially been cut in half over the last few years. So a lot of our focus goes into working with the customers to set realistic expectations, and really to kind of change that mind shift away from planning for just-in-time type of deployments to a more of a forecasted total scope mentality, so that we as a supply chain organization can effectively leverage our facilities, our warehouse spaces, and our supply chain logistics teams to coordinate and support in country, in region, or global theater deployments. This really goes hand in hand with working with Convergint, as everybody has kind of mentioned in the past, is how do we take those lessons and then sit down with Convergint and build customized supply chain solutions that add real value, not just to what we think as an organization at Wesco Anixter, but also increase the productivity of an organization like Convergint, and ultimately deliver these projects under the increased increased time frame. So part of that is also making sure that we have resiliency built into the supply chain. As Brent mentioned, we have to have a way to quickly pivot when things are no longer available, or there are supply chain disruptions with a specific manufacturer. So identifying what devices are critical and having built-in pre-approved responses or alternates to those, so that we can make changes as necessary per market or global theater to another alternate backup product if necessary.
Yeah, that's a great point. Thanks a lot, Steve. I want to get back to Andy here. Andy, would you agree? We are actually in a fortunate position as a result of the maturity of today's data center infrastructure, with all the resiliency has been designed in over years, and the current spike in the workload has been handled pretty well, right? So this could have been a lot worse. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, no, I would totally agree. I think we've come a long way as a data center industry over the last 15 to 20 years. Again, my colleagues have done a good job talking about the supply chain resiliency, but in terms of the resiliency of the operations, standards have been in place to make sure that we have absolute uptime in our data center facilities. So this was pioneered originally by the Uptime Institute. So they had requirements for uptime for the power and cooling systems. And they came up with this tier structure where tier 1 was just your basic data center with no redundant components, all the way up to tier 4, which is a completely fault tolerant data center operation for power and cooling, using redundant power backups and diverse pathways for power and cooling. So this translates into a very high uptime. So 99.995% uptime for a tier 4 data center. And I would say most of the data center operators that we work with today are minimum tier 3, with some that are tier 4, depending on how you can get access to diverse sources of power. But I would say that as an industry, it's very resilient. And the standards I mentioned earlier, we're continually working as an industry to improve the operational efficiency as well as the resiliency for these data center facilities. So there's new standards for TIA that have defined your tiering structures and applying this tiering structure to other subsystems. So looking at things like your telecommunications infrastructure, how can you make that more resilient? Looking at your physical security infrastructure. So in the case of an outage, we can look at those things as well. So I think there's a lot of good industry best practices that have been developed over the last a decade and a half, and I think we're really well positioned to meet again the resiliency and uptime requirements of today's applications and users.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you, Andy. I want to get to Brad here. From your wide experience, especially from the construction side. How have you seen the supply chain effect in the data center space? Are there any story you can share with us? And the matter is good or bad?
Yeah, well, I think the key again, and I kind of touched on it before, is just having that communication and that integrated supply chain with all the various players that are involved in the process. And I mean, it's complicated, right? There's a lot of various, people and organizations and products and what have you that goes into any sort of construction project, particularly for a data center. And so the more integrated that you can go up on this scale here, the better off and the smoother the supply chain is going to be. So, starting at the far left where it just says product cost, that's something as simple as just, calling up a supplier looking for pricing and availability on a widget. And they say, that costs $10, you'll have it in 2 days. There's value to that, certainly, but it's, kind of bare bones, right? As you move along and you're working with partners who've got some knowledge of the product and can make some, it says product expansion. By that meaning, you call up and you ask, hey, well, I want to order this cabinet. And the person on the other end of the phone says, okay, great, here's your pricing on the cabinet. What about vertical cable managers? Do you need those? What about fiber jumpers? What about PDUs? What about all of them? And so just kind of those gentle reminders about, oh yeah, that's right, I do need to order those as well. But then as you start getting into some real value add is, as we continue going on here, like some of the installation enhancement services, things like we touched on with the pre-labeling of patch cords, right? It's not sending people to the moon, right? But it's a labor savings and a time savings device that can help make that rollout go more efficiently, right? And if you're, if you look at scale, right? If you have, somebody else partner up, say, and, label your fiber jumpers for you. If you're buying 10 fiber jumpers, are you really saving a lot of time if someone labels those 10 for you before they get to the job site? Probably not. If you're ordering 1,800 fiber jumpers and someone can do it for you before it arrives on the job site, you're really going to save some time, right? But it requires that prior planning and, working and communicating as well. Project deployment services, that's where we really integrate all of these things. And, with, the labeling and some of those delivery options that I touched on with the cages, the pre-assembled cabinets, right? Which can really, they can make such a difference. We just did a project a couple of weeks ago at a multi-tenant data center where we delivered 24 pre-assembled cabinets that were, built and loaded with all the passive infrastructure that was required and delivered to the job site. In that case, the customer was looking to get LEED certification for green building initiatives that they have. And so they asked us to measure the amount of recycling that we did on their behalf in our facility. Well, those 24 cabinets, it was almost 1,600 pounds of cardboard that stayed in the Anixter facility and that we recycled. Now, that's great if you're going for LEED certification, then provide that documentation, that's great. But even if not, otherwise, who's dealing with that $1,600 or 1,600 pounds rather of cardboard? If it's on the job site, that means it's the installers, it's the integrators who have got better training and better things to do, frankly, than, breaking up boxes and taking them to the dumpster. And then certainly, kind of the pinnacle of all this would be a fully integrated supply chain program where we're working with all players together, talking about scheduling, talking about deliveries, talking about lead times, and all this sort of stuff, because again, we all know, this is a complex process to do, and over communication is usually not the problem. It's usually under communication that causes issues to pop up down the road.
Yeah, thank you very much, Brad. I know we have several questions posted here. Before we get to them, I want to ask Steve, do you have some final thought and a comment here before we get a question session.
Yeah, I think just continuing along the same theme of, what makes these projects work, how do we support them, and really looking at partners and organizations like Wesco Anixter and organizations like Convergent, taking a look at how they support the entire data center ecosystem. You look at Wesco Anixter and the products that we can bring to market and deploy and support, not just from a product component, as Brett had mentioned earlier, but really looking at what can we do from a value add to increase the time to market with those products as well, to get your project or your projects up and running quicker and smoother. Wesco Anixter can support the entire ecosystem here, from electrical products and cable trays, physical security products and lighting solutions, network infrastructure solutions, racks, enclosures and cabinets, and then also power and thermal solutions, and doing these and deploying these systems with completely integrated supply chain solutions that ultimately help you as the data center customer or as the integrator that's working with us save your clients time, reduce their cost, and also mitigate risk for the overall project deployments.
Yeah, thank you very much, Steve. We are about 14 minutes left here, so let's get on some questions here. So the first question we have, can we get a presentation of this session? The answer is yes. Please feel free to reach out to your Convergent account executive. You will get the copy of the presentation from us. The next question is it any specific design tool for the accurate design for the data center power and the network design? I don't know, Andy or Randy, do you want to take on this question?
Yeah, I can maybe take the first pass at it. There isn't a specific design tool per se. I think what you need to do is really break it down by subsystem. So whether it's your power distribution, your cooling systems, your telecommunications and network systems, you really need to look at each one and see what makes sense. There's a lot of, as I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of standards and best practices that can be leveraged. So for instance, on the cabling infrastructure, you can reference the TIA 942 series of standards to provide your good guidance as far as how to construct and design your data center cabling infrastructure. They also have some recommendations, as I mentioned, around the tiering of the other subsystems. But as far as a magic tool that's out there today, there really isn't one. I think there's some selection tools, like for instance, a lot of the power vendors that we work with have configuration tools that help you do the correct product selection. Maybe not so much design, but they can at least help you size like a UPS or other type of distribution panel for your critical load. So they do have some guidance in terms of making sure that you have the right materials in place to be able to support the critical load. But I wish there was some magic tool where you could put a bunch of input in and then you get a nice spiffy design. But it really takes a lot of due diligence on the operator to really construct something that fits their needs, because again, their needs are going to be different depending on how they're managing their data center operations.
Thank you, Andy. Any additional comment from the panel?
I'll add a couple of different things on that. To Andy's point, a lot of best practices and guidance is provided by various different organizations built around the data center community. The real issue comes down to really understanding what type of data is going to be being used primarily in that data center, and how you want to engineer the traffic loads within the data center, and then how you want to scale the data center from a tiering perspective. What the one thing that doesn't just jump out when you start looking at the Uptime tiering model is one of the great things is it also gives you a lot of guidance on what you can expect to pay per square foot based on which tiering model that you're looking at. So one of the things you have to start with is, what's the budget for this data center? And then you can start looking at what kind of resiliency and what kind of uptime requirements you want to scale into it, what kind of redundancy and design elements that you want to put into it based on what you want to spend.
Yeah, thank you very much, Randy, for the input here. Our next question is, can you touch on the Anixter solution that allows Converging Anixter to have a standing or replenishing supply to help offset delays in the product deliver? Give example like a chip shortage right now got a lot of folks' attention and so I want to ask Steve and probably Brad, and would you like to share with us your opinion on this?
Yeah, I can jump in here and take a first pass at this because I think this is it's a great question, really, and it's kind of in line with what's happening right now in the marketplace. This really comes down to us as a team working together, Anixter, Convergent, the customer, to understand what the capacity is and what their forecasted demand is, so that we can make smart decisions around one, how we stock products within our facilities, and then also having other strategies. Maybe there's some inventory that we can push all the way out to the data center that can be managed through Anixter systems like RapidFire that are hosted right at the site. So we have a whole solution kind of targeted to this and how we manage this, but it also speaks to the need to have some redundancy built into the supply chain or resiliency built into that supply chain to understand if a specific manufacturer is going to be delayed in delivering product, that we can pivot to a pre-qualified alternate as well. So these are the things that we work with every day with our Convergent partners to understand what the needs are, understanding the forecast, and also working with the customers to understand what alternatives do we have to solution and support these deployments.
Yeah, Steve, I couldn't have said it better. I think that's exactly right. And it goes back to that communication piece of it. And really this sort of stuff, inventory programs, I mean, that's at the core of what we do. And it's great when we can work, with a Convergent and with an end user and particularly for the hyperscale customers that are, usually global in nature. We can have this, from as close to the job site as on the job site, like Steve said, with some on-site inventory management programs, as well as having inventory, on hand in the various countries, various regions around the world, multiple locations, again, to build in that redundancy piece of it. So, and then again, on the back end, having that communication, what's the minimum amount we need to have on hand? What's the maximum? What's your deployment schedule? Allowing us to work with the manufacturers to get ahead of any delays with, chipsets or whatever else might be that is a constraint to manage that and keep the product flow going, because ultimately we want it all to be invisible to our customers, right? They just want to, get the product in and installed when it's supposed to happen. And we want to do that so that all of our clients are pleased with the level of service that we're providing.
Yeah, certainly the supply chain strategy got a lot of attention and the inquiry here. Our next question is, are they any projection regarding how long the equipment supply chain will be disrupt and what the overall impact will be to the data center construction industry? What are your recommendations to help to mitigate these challenges?
I can take it.
Go ahead, Brett.
All right, thanks. Yeah, I mean, I would say that, I wish we had the crystal ball. I think, none of us really know, unfortunately, this time. Did we foresee this chip shortage or steel shortage or copper or what have you? I don't know. There's smarter people in the world than I am. I certainly didn't anticipate any of that too. And I don't think we know with certainty when it's going to end. And so, again, it just makes that communication and the team collaboration that much more important, right? Because we can have the situation. I'll just keep using chips as an example. Like, we know what the situation is today. What's it going to be like a month from now? Well, we don't know. But if we're talking every week and keeping up with the latest changes as they're happening in the industry, then we can be as educated and as in front of things as possible. I don't know if any of the other panelists have anything they'd like to contribute to.
Yeah, I would say some of the projections we're seeing from companies like Cisco and other, semiconductor companies is they're telling us at least constraint through the next 2 to 3 quarters. So that brings us well into 2022 in terms of when they expect the supply chain to kind of even out on that side. So really going back to forecast, demand planning, and having approved alternates so that you can pivot and make decisions that can keep your business flowing.
Yeah, thank you, Brad and Steve. Our next question is, how will network connectivity be optimized? This actually circle back to what Andy and Randy you mentioned during the session. So would you like to take on this one?
Yeah, I can go first. So yeah, to the earlier point, the optimization really comes through the network, design. So really over the course of the last several years, the way the data and information and the way the servers process information in the data center has changed. So it used to be you wanted to optimize the north-south traffic, so from the core to the aggregation to the access layer. But now you've got server-to-server connections you have to maintain. So this east-west traffic within the data center has to be supported. So from an optimization point of view, you just have to again look at what is the right architecture based on the performance requirements that you're trying to achieve within the data center. So again, spine leaf architectures have been around for the last several years and can be leveraged for these very high demand, low latency type data centers. So I think from that point of view, those types of best practices can be leveraged. But again, it's not a one size fits all proposition. You'll just have to look to see what makes the most sense for your application needs and optimize accordingly.
Yeah, let me add one other thing to that. With more and more adoption of software designed networking, you're moving more and more of the virtualization and the things that you see within the data center into the internet and into the WAN as a whole. And what you're going to be seeing a lot more of is back to the latency issue. Where traffic engineers are able to do it, they're going to shunt more and more of the low latency traffic to the edge data centers to deal with it there rather than move it upstream. So, the tools are in place and they're being adapted a little bit to deal with it on a wider footprint. But you will see more and more traffic engineering move low latency applications to the edge of the network.
Thank you, Andy and Randy. Our next question is relative to the response to COVID here. So the question is, data center deployment affected by the restriction being lifted with COVID-19. Are there any red flags with the business continuity procedures being adjusted for this?
I'll take a shot at this one if you don't, unless anybody else wants to jump in on it. One of the things that we're seeing in the data center is when COVID-19 hit, they were affected like everybody else. Now they were mission critical, so they were allowed to continue operating, but they immediately enacted policies to really reduce contact by people and the number of bodies that were moving in and out of the data center. That's actually probably not going to change because we've seen a big investment and a big uptick in how these people, how the data centers are going to look at remote management and how they continue to reduce bodies being on site where they can. There's a number of reasons for that, but one of the largest is that human error is one of the biggest causes for outages in the data center. So from a red flag perspective, I think what you'll see is you're going to see fewer business continuity issues addressed around this because they've got better tools in place now, and those tools are going to become a commonplace part of the architecture moving forward.
Thank you, Randy, for that. I think we're right on time here. A big thank you to everyone from the audience and also to the panel. Thank you for taking time to join us today. We would love to continue the conversation here. With those questions or comments we have not get to during the session, we'll make sure we do the follow-up with you, and please leave your contact information to us. Also, please feel free to reach out your Converging account executive if you would like to schedule the follow-up discussions here. So, well, please do us a favor, help to complete the session survey. We really like to hear your feedback here. Thank you, everyone. Enjoy other session at our summit and stay safe.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.